Thank you so much for sticking around. So, as Hannah said, my name is Jamie Dobson. I'm the co-founder, and I was the chief executive of Container Solutions, but I no longer hold that position. I have no more reports or angry customers. They go to the new person. We are the good guys of cloud, I think. We've done a lot of cool things, and my team recently have knocked a bit of a home run out the park with our compliance framework. And when they were doing that, I was doing this. Putting the finishing touches to Visionaries, Rebels and Machines, which, unless I'm being lied to, has gone down very well. The reviews are very positive and our customers have enjoyed it, and so too have many people in the community. So what are we going to talk about today? I'm going to need those notes later. First of all, there are a number of books to give away. So for the people who ask sensible questions, you will win a prize. The best question gets a limited edition green hardback. There's only 150 of them. They're all individually marked. So that's the questions. If you use that QR code, Hannah will sort it out at the end in the QA. I'll leave that there for just one more second. Of course, that leads me to say, what on earth will we be talking about today? Well, originally, the title was The Curious Case of Marv Minsky. However, after the CFP closed and I got this sorted out, a better title sprang to mind, which was The Fall and Rise of the Mighty Neuron. Is Michael Cote still here? He said earlier, hello mate, hi, are you all right there? You said earlier that this all started about 2.5 years ago with ChatGPT. I'm not sure your timeline matches with mine. What I'll be doing, 3 things in particular, we'll be talking about births, the schism and legacy. So at the turn of the last century, not the turn of this century, a number of ideas were circulating around. Some of them bumped into each other, got married and gave birth to other ideas. This led to the beginning of what we nowadays call artificial intelligence. This conference is about explaining difficult concepts. It's AI for the rest of us. And what I found in my research and in my note-taking in preparation for today is that understanding the beginnings of things might help us to understand where we are today and where we might go in the future. And then, of course, the schism, the meat of the talk. Something happened when artificial intelligence was born, all the way back in 1956. The resolution of that conflict or the resolution of that schism left a legacy. Those are the 3 things that I want to talk about today. So let's begin with births. In many ways, the story today is about 2 schools of thought. The symbol manipulation school of thought and the connectionism school of thought. Connectionism had people in that school, such as Frank Rosenblatt. The symbol manipulation school of thought had a man or 2 men, Seymour Papert and Marvin Minsky, who will feature heavily today. Their story, like so many good stories, starts in Lincolnshire. This is George Boole. George was a Victorian mathematician. He had a funny idea for a new system of algebra. It only had 2 symbols, true and false, and there were only 3 operators, and, or, and not. That was it. George had this idea that if he could collect enough true and false facts about the world, he would be able to create intelligent equations that could maybe predict human behavior or predict what might come next. George Boole would have most likely have been forgotten to the annals of history, not least because in an act of epic organic stupidity, he went for a walk to the university, got soaking wet and developed a bad cold, but his wife, believing in the old adage, what makes you bad makes you better, wrapped him in freezing cold blankets and he died of pneumonia aged only 49. We know about George Boole because of another man, probably the only bona fide genius in the history of computing, Mr. Claude Shannon. Claude Shannon was from the Midwest and he went to study, I think at Michigan, not 1 thing, but 2 things. Electrical engineering and mathematics. And then in what's been described as, I think this is a quote, you can check me, fact check me, somebody did a fact checking app earlier, Ricardo, where's he gone? Is he still here? It was described as the most influential master's thesis ever, period. Why? What happened? Well, from the mathematical side of Claude Shannon's studies, he started to think about Boolean algebra. And from the electrical engineering side of his studies, he came to a stunning conclusion, a conclusion that actually changed the world. He realized that anything that could be expressed in Boolean algebra could be implemented in a circuit. Computing machines up until that point, some of them were analog, some of them were digital, but they were also mechanical, ratchets and rotors. If Claude Shannon was right, that slide, pretend you didn't see that, I don't need that anymore. If Claude Shannon was right, then it is possible, if George Boole was right in the first instance, and these equations could lead to intelligence, and if Claude Shannon was right, that those equations could be implemented in circuitry, then thinking or intelligence could be done at the speed of the electron instead of at the speed of rotors and wheels and mechanical systems. And that lady was the concept art for the cover. In the end, we settled on Grey Cyborg. That is my nod to Claude Shannon, the cyborg on the front of the cover. But of course, I'm not the only one tipping my hat to Claude Shannon. There's a reason why Anthropic's generative AI system is called Claude, because it too is named after Shannon. This was about George Boole and Claude Shannon. This work was about symbol manipulation, gathering facts and operating on them. Marvin Minsky, that's the man on the photograph, was well and truly in this school of thought. I do want to point out something right now. When they spoke back then about machine learning or machine intelligence or artificial intelligence, they meant actual machines like that. Because we hadn't figured out, humanity had not figured out yet how to simulate intelligence or machinery or rules inside a computer. So programming, as we know it, did not exist back then. Programming was limited to punch cards, which was to do with batch processing and numeric calculations. So when they talked about machine intelligence, it really was actual machines. There's Minsky's friend, Seymour Papert, with another machine. This one draws fishes. And so these boys, or these gentlemen I should say, were in the symbolic manipulation school of thought. But there was another school of thought, the psychologists. The symbol manipulators mainly, it wasn't cut and dry, mainly wanted machine intelligence for the sake of machine intelligence, but they wanted smarter machines so that all the bore and chore work that we do could be outsourced to robots. The psychologists, though, wanted to understand machine intelligence because they hoped it would lead to a better understanding of human intelligence. This is the most important psychologist you probably don't know. I've got a book for anybody who can tell me what that is. Who that is, sorry. It's a tricky question. So that's J.C.R. Licklider. He was an acoustic psychologist. He studied how sound was processed. He worked in Harvard, and on the other side of the corridor was a man called B.F. Skinner. Skinner was, well, at that point, he'd become a radical behaviorist, and his idea really was radical. For him, it had all started with Pavlov's dog. Pavlov put some food in a bowl, dung, rang a bell, and the dog connected the two and would salivate when the bell rang. You take away the food, ring the bell, the dog would still salivate. So through conditioning, Pavlov had gotten that dog to do, not just to salivate, but to do numerous different things. Skinner had a radical approach to psychology. He said, we do not have minds. There is no sense of mind. There is no such thing as joy or happiness or sadness. You're only sad because you've been conditioned to be sad under certain stimuli because of your mum and dad. So this was extremely radical notion. He had a stranglehold on American academia and British academia. You could not get funded or grants or a professorship if you were not a Skinnerite, if you were not a radical behaviorist. But at the same time, across the corridor from Skinner, Licklider and his friend Norbert Wiener were having completely different ideas, equally radical. This had started for them in the Second World War and arguably started around here in London. During the conflict, German bombers would come over, drop bombs on the East End, not far from here. And we had guns stationed all over London. If you look carefully, you can see where they used to be. There's often plaques. Sometimes the guns are just left there as a memento to history. The problem was the planes would zigzag and no human gun operator could ever get that machine lined up because it wasn't just about putting the shell into the place where the German plane was, it was trying to put a shell into the space where the German plane would be. Now, Norbert Wiener had an idea. He came up with a mathematical model which predicted the flight paths of the German planes. If, he said, we can put that model, embody that model in a small computing device, attach it to a gun, and then dang, 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 poof, the gun would pull the trigger, no human would be involved, and the shell would reach the sky at exactly the same time as the German plane. Victory. They never implemented the gun because the war came to an end before we'd finished it. He was late, like all developers. But I cannot underestimate how profound a moment in humanity this was. Wiener's gun, do you want me to go back to that slide for the photographers? Wiener's gun was taking purposeful actions in the present to achieve a goal in the future. There's only really one, maybe two if you include squirrels. There's only one type of animal on this planet that does that, and that's human beings. So there was a sense of mind, a sense of purpose inside of Norbert Wiener's gun computer. And he knew he was onto something, so he looked for a name that matched this important breakthrough that he'd had. Angelos was the name he came up with, from the Greek for messenger. But of course, angel in English I should say, is the messenger of God. This was way too religious for Norbert Wiener. But he thought of another word, and this was it. This had to be it. Gubernator, a Latin word for steersman or helmsman. This is a good word, because what does a helmsman do? They take purposeful actions in the present to achieve a goal in the future, which is to get the cargo and the crew and the ship safely to harbour. But then he realised that gubernator had been anglicised to governor. James Governor's relatives had stolen the name centuries earlier. Fuck, what does he do? What does Norbert Wiener now do? But then he looked out, because gubernator has a Greek root, chybenetis. Now, I don't know if there's any Greek people in the room. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Chybenetis is the Greek root of gubernator. So, yes, Norbert Wiener has found his word. Chybenetis, of course, would become a famous open source tool, Kubernetes. But back then, when anglicised, we get to cybernetics. So that gun, that one idea, gave birth to probably the most important sort of theory to do with artificial intelligence that we presently have. That is the beginning. These are the births. The psychologists are thinking about machine intelligence because it's going to help them with human intelligence. The symbol manipulators want clever machines. Norbert Wiener's running around with a gun that he thinks embodies mind and purpose. And B.F. Skinner's across the corridor thinking there's no such thing as the mind. And in fact, give me any child, give me a group of children, and I can give you a conference organizer, a computer programmer. I can make them happy, I can make them sad, because it's all conditioning. All of these ideas collided in 1956 at a now famous conference in Dartmouth. Dartmouth is a university in the United States. I think their motto is crying out in the wilderness or something like that, which is what we were all doing after this conference had finished. That's Minsky in the middle. That's Nat Rochester on his right. He put together the first computer programming courses at MIT, where the term hacker jumped from the model train group to the computer programming group, and that's Claude Shannon on the end. It wasn't a normal conference. It wasn't a two-day jobby. It was 2 months. And when Minsky went cadging for money, begging for money, he had to convince the people funding this 2-month conference, where he promised them nearly all problems in artificial intelligence will be solved by August. That's what he told the people giving him the money, right? And so he had to think of a name, and he came up with a name that he hated, Claude Shannon hated, Rochester hated, but they couldn't think of anything else. And so they said, oh, let's call it artificial intelligence. So all of these ideas coalesced in 1956. And some of the early wins were absolutely staggering. But Minsky did something even more interesting, in my opinion. Minsky cooked up a system for creating geometric proofs. One of the proofs had never been done before. His machine, in other words, proved one of the, I think it was something that Euclid had proven, I can't remember what that is. But the point is that no human had ever done it. If something new appears, we usually call that creative. Now, this foreshadows the famous move 37. That's Lee Sedol. He's just come back from a cigarette break outside. He's a pretty good Go player, but his nerves were bad. That's one of the advantages the machine had. Machines don't get nervous. And when he returned from his cigarette break, he found that tile there with the red dot on it. That was move 37. It took him minutes to react to this because he couldn't work out. He's looking there, puzzled. What is this? Is this a mistake? Or is this a move that I've never seen before? Well, it was a move that they think no human had ever played. And it proved decisive because it won Sudol the match. This sort of machine creativity had also appeared with Minsky and his geometric proofs. And then, of course, came the hubris. Oh, a machine will be the chess champion by 67. John McCarthy at Stanford said his team would have an intelligent machine within 10 years. You might have heard of McCarthy. He invented cloud computing 50 years before cloud computing was a thing. And Minsky said, we've solved most of the problems in that 2-month conference. You should definitely give us more money because in the next 10 years, we're going to solve everything else. And then Herb Simon, with the absolute McDaddy of predictions, not only will we solve intelligence, but we will embody it in robots. And by 1986, none of us will be working. As doctors, as teachers, as street sweepers, none of us will be working. What a future we've got to look forward to. History repeats itself, they say, first as tragedy and then as farce. This hype around AI is nothing new. It's just new to you lot, right? It's not new because people need to blow up speculative bubbles. They need to exit them at the right moment and get stinkingly rich. All that has come before is coming again right now. Was there an alternative? Well, there needed to be an alternative because the symbol manipulation school quickly ran into serious difficulties. Logical puzzles, geometrical proofs were one thing, but what about translating one language into another? What about a practical use of artificial intelligence? Well, they couldn't find any. There was an alternative. The alternative came from connectionism. Frank Rosenblatt, he had this idea of copying the only intelligent gadget that he knew about, the human brain. And he started with the neuron. Now, Crystal ruined my surprise because she had this photograph in her deck earlier. This is a neuron. Forget the details. The only thing you need to care about are that dendrites carry signals into a neuron, and when a threshold is met, when a number of dendrites are excited, the axon fires an electrical charge. Electrical charge. A charge that is either on or not, absent or present, 0 or 1. This makes the neuron not just a miracle of biology, but a miracle of computation, because it changes analog signals into digital signals. And that meant that Frank Rosenblatt could model it mathematically. If these nodes carry a signal and they add up to a certain number, boom, the artificial neuron fires. And when you organize those into networks of neurons, you start to get something that doesn't look exactly like the human brain, but looks like a simulation of it. Rosenblatt went on to build an amazing machine, the Perceptron. This is the 1957 paper. There's a sensor on the left. The letter X is picked up by the sensor. Parts of the matrix are mapped to nodes in the neural network, and the machine will say, yes, it's an X, or no, it's not an X. Well, how did it know? Because Rosenblatt had trained the neural network. There's been a lot of talks today about how do you train a neural network. When it gets it wrong, you tell it off. You say, bad computer, bad computer. And when it does well, you say, good computer. So not only had Rosenblatt simulated what goes on in the human mind, he also simulated how a child learns. This was a remarkably promising line of inquiry. And like Papert and Minsky, he didn't put this into a computer program. He literally built a machine. And if you see over his left shoulder, if you look carefully, you can see the equation for the simulated neural network. The summation of the nodes, and then the threshold being met, and then the binary signal being sent. So what the fuck happened? If he invented neural networks in 1969, what's been going on for the last 50 years? Well, the first thing that happened was this book came out. It's called Perceptrons. This was, and I quote, seriously misleading, because Perceptrons was not written by Frank Rosenblatt. It was written by Marvin Minsky and Seymour Papert, who came from a different school of thought, a different area of research. And they praised the perceptron, they said what it could do, but sprinkled throughout the pages were criticisms, including the criticism that you couldn't calculate exclusive OR with the neural network. That's not true, by the way. They knew it wasn't true. And then in their research funding applications, they slammed perceptrons. What had happened? Where had the money gone? Well, the Vietnam conflict, or the conflict in Vietnam, was coming to its bloody but obvious end. And the American system, or I should say the capitalist system, for the very first time ever, had high inflation and zero growth. That had never been seen before, so they invented a new word, stagflation. The money was running out, and Papert and Minsky wanted it for themselves. I know what you're thinking. You don't believe me. That's fine, because academics don't do stuff like that, do they? Right? Right? They're above all of that. Well, don't take my word for it. You should instead take Seymour Papert's words for it, because in 1985, he wrote his stunning confession. He started off, I think he was trying to be funny. He should leave the jokes to me. Once upon a time, two daughter sciences were born to the new science of cybernetics. One of them was natural and another was mechanical. But Lord DARPA, that's the Advanced Research Project Agency's, coffers were running out. So Papert and Minsky, cast in the role as huntsmen, were sent to kill Snow White and bring back her bloody heart. The weapon, not the dagger, but the pen, for it is truly mightier than the sword. He wrote that. He thought he was funny. And so the confession is right there, and I've got the full paper if anybody wants to see it. This is shocking. It is really, really shocking for two reasons. The first thing is, neural networks were really kicked into the academic long grass for about a decade. Symbol manipulation did get all the money, and they just went absolutely nowhere. Expert machines, a little bit of progress with them. So it was a remarkable waste of money. But there are no pictures of an aging Frank Rosenblatt. So he exited the computer world, an absolute broken man, and then died in a boating accident in 1971. He was only 42. So this is the real story. This is the real shocker. And it's made worse because Minsky and Frank Rosenblatt had known each other since they were children. They were both graduates from the Bronx School of Science in New York. So it was really, I feel, a despicable and wicked act from those two guys. But Rosenblatt would get the last laugh, because away in the recesses of academia, certainly not applying for the same grants that Papert and Minsky were applying for, the connectionism gang, the neural network gang, were working on the back propagation of errors. This is something that Frank Rosenblatt knew he needed, but he didn't know how to implement it. There were a number of breakthroughs in the early 80s, including some work from Jeffrey Hinton, who recently won the Nobel Prize, that led to this theoretical breakthrough. But it wasn't the only breakthrough that was required to bring neural networks alive as they are alive today. Who knows who they are? Surely. Thank you, old person at the back. I can't actually see you without my glasses. Who is it?
Sorry, I misunderstood the question.
Oh, that's fine. I'm not always clear. I am wondering how the artificial intelligence is dealing with my East Yorkshire accent, because Riverside's crap. So these are the guys from Intel. This is Gordon Moore. So Gordon Moore didn't just predict that the number of transistors you could cram onto a microchip would double every 18 months. It was their sacred duty to make it happen. And that meant, well, in 10, 20, 30, 40 years, the number of transistors on a microchip, the number of things that can be on or off, might not exactly be the same amount as in a human brain, but we might be getting there. Neural networks require lots and lots of computer power, but they need something else as well. So ARPA, another one of their more famous projects, came to a conclusion in around about 1979. They'd been working on a system to connect different networks, satellite networks, radio networks, physical networks. And this Uber network, this network of network, or so-called internet as they called it, was shown to work under conditions, even the sort of conditions that simulated a nuclear attack in 1979. And then in I was going to say 89. I've got a lot of dates to remember. Tim Berners-Lee was pissed off. He was pissed off because if he wanted to call a colleague on a different part of CERN, he would have to pick up this huge phone book, look up their name, and then dial the number. When he was on a computer on the same network as them, he convinced the telephone people to digitize that telephone book, stick it on a computer, on a server, he called it, and then you could browse the telephone book using what he called hyperlinks. When he invented the web, Tim Berners-Lee, of course, created the internet's killer application, and once we had the web, we had poems, user-generated data, people's status updates on social media, and lots of images of cats, lots of images of cats, and lots of images of dogs. Neural networks require tons of computing power and tons of data, and so when the web landed, all the pieces were in place for large-scale neural networks to be trained and put to sensible use. I think that happened in the 2010s. So in a way, Rosenblatt's legacy is complete. I think he got the last laugh. So I think the question I wanted to ask myself, or I wanted to ask you, did Rosenblatt, this visionary and rebel who built an amazing machine, know the sort of confusion and chaos and excitement he was going to cause right here in 2025? Did he know he would create a system or a tool that touched nearly every person on the planet and then forced Hannah to start this conference, AI for the rest of us, just so we could learn all about it, so we could learn to coexist with these devices? No, probably not. But what is true, in the 119 years since the neuron was understood and discovered in about 1906, we have gone from not really, there was no such thing as a computing device. In 119 years, we've gone from having nothing to machines that cannot exactly think, but are at least a little bit useful. So then what comes next for all of us, the visionaries and the rebels in this room, all the people who build machines? I think that's for each of us to decide. What type of world do we want to live in, and what type of world do we want our children to grow up in? The past is known, but I think the future is going to be left to all of us. Thank you.